Hello and welcome to part 3 in a series of videos that I'm putting out where I break down all the fights taking place at UFC on ESPN plus 11 from a betting perspective. Now I've already covered 6 fights on this card, which I covered in parts 1 and 2 of this video. I will leave a link to both those in the description below, and in today's video I'll be smashing through another 3 fights. And also don't forget, if you want me to do a live stream for UFC on ESPN plus 11 where I go through all the fights and try and find a decent value prop bet for all the fights, and where I also answer all your questions from the live chat, hit the like button below. And if every video that I put out gets 300 likes, every video this week gets 300 likes, I will do that live stream a few hours before UFC Stockholm is scheduled to take place. But now, before we get into talking about the fights, I want to discuss something which I think may help you guys a lot. And I want to talk about the concept of losing, which I know will be the complete opposite of what many of you watching this video will want to talk about. So I'll timestamp the fights that I talk about in this video below in the description. If you want to skip ahead to that, go ahead and you can just forget about the next 10 or 15 minutes that I'm going to be talking about losing. Now, the reason why I want to talk about losing in this video is because losing is very important. It's just as important to master the skill of winning as to master the skill of losing, because losing happens to all of us. It doesn't matter how good you get at something, you will take losses. I make a living from betting on MMA and I lose all the time, and when you get comfortable with losing, it is often the final piece of the puzzle to actually go on and crush it long term. Because if you think about it, you have to be resilient in life. You know, if every time you took a loss it affected your judgment, you wouldn't be very good at gambling. Just like in football, if every time Cristiano Ronaldo got tackled or every time Odell Beckham got tackled, if they let that affect their performance, they'd be pretty shitty football players. You've got to be resilient and you've got to push through knockbacks and setbacks. And the current way that the UFC fights are falling makes this a very good time to talk about losing, because at times like this, it is much more likely that you will take a loss than you will take a win. And I'll get into the reasons why in just a moment. But I want to cover these kind of topics in these videos because what I've been finding over the last 2 or 3 months since I've been on YouTube is in part 1 of my videos where I tend to talk about, you know, the main event fights or the bigger fights on a card. You know, I get loads of comments from casual viewers of the sport, casual gamblers that only care about the big fights and they're not interested in the betting theory or strategies to make money. And I can tell this because generally speaking, the amount of comments that I get in part 1 of each video is very immature. People just want to talk about picks, who's going to win, who's going to lose, who's right, who's wrong, who's the best, and they're really not interested in the underlying strategies or methods that you can use to crush it long term. And then I've noticed throughout the week, as I get into parts 2, 3 and 4 of my videos, the comments become way more mature, the discussions become way more mature and deep and interesting, and I can tell that the people that watch parts 2, 3 and 4 of my videos are just way more intelligent gamblers, way more mature, they know way more about the sport of MMA, and they're just way more open-minded, which is the audience that I really care about. Like, I really care about you if you are watching this video. I want you to crush it, I want you to do well, and that's why I want to start talking about more of these deep topics, these deep strategies later on in these series of videos, where I know that the people that actually care about this kind of stuff, the people that will actually find this useful, will be watching, and we can leave the morons to worry about the main event fights and the big fights, and we'll just talk about the deep stuff as we go on later on throughout the week. So the stuff that I talk about will really depend on whatever is topical at the moment in the MMA calendar, and I believe there's something that's very topical at the moment is the fact that this event, the UFC Stockholm event, is very bad for betting. I've researched the whole card, and unless the odds move significantly on any one of these fighters, I probably won't have any bets for this card. And I felt exactly the same about the UFC on ESPN plus 10 card between Dos Anjos and Lee. Now, most people will find this very annoying. Most people will be frustrated that I'm saying this. They will call me a fraud. The fact that there's 24 MMA fights, 12 on this card, 12 on UFC Stockholm, they'll call me a fraud, they'll call me clueless, they'll call me a fool, that I cannot find any decent bets that I like across 24 fights. But This is just the way the cards fall sometimes. You have to remember that the betting sites that take bets from you, that take money from you, are multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies. Their job is to try and set these odds as accurately as possible, to force you into making bad betting decisions, to smoke you out your hole, to psych you out, to bait you into making bad betting decisions. Because you're sat there at home agonizing over bullshit fights where there is no value either side. And the longer it goes without you placing a bet, the more chance there is that you will place a bet. You know, on last week's card, UFC on ESPN plus 10, people were just debating shitty fights for betting all week. Debating fights like Felicia Spencer against Megan Anderson, Shoeface against Ian Heinisch, Danny Roberts against Pereira, Grant Dawson against Trizano. These are really shitty fights for betting. They weren't great for betting. None of them were great for betting. I'm guilty of this myself. I bet on Mike Trizano. It wasn't a bet that I loved. It really wasn't. And these type of cards are the cards which can lead to variance and prolonged losing streaks. And it's really important to stay disciplined at times like this and not try and get the dopamine hit. Not try and be the smartest guy at the bar or the smartest guy on social media. Just to understand that when there are no opportunities, that's just the way it is, because it's the betting site's job to cap these fights accurately, and sometimes there just won't be any good bets. You know, if fights like Shoeface against Ian Heinisch or Felicia Spencer against Megan Anderson were to take place on another card coming up in a few weeks, which were better for betting, like UFC 238 Cejudo against Moraes, people wouldn't give a shit about these fights. They wouldn't be arguing about them or discussing them in detail. They wouldn't care. They would just easily pass on them because there are better opportunities. But because you get cards like this, which are terrible for betting, people agonize over these fights and try and force bad bets. I mean, let's be real. It doesn't matter whether you made a profit or a loss on this card. It probably wasn't smart to place any bets. I mean, Lee versus Dos Anjos, no one could have known how Lee was going to look at welterweight, and if he would have showed up with a slightly better strategy and tactics than just spamming takedowns and gassing himself out, that fight could have gone very differently. Same with Felicia Spencer against Megan Anderson. Spencer got so high up on Anderson's back on 2 or 3 occasions that 99% of fighters would have been able to shake her off. Anderson didn't, but how could you know before the fight took place? Shoeface against Heinisch, there was no safe bets here. Shoeface, a very, very strong grappler. Heinisch, terrible takedown defense. Shoeface dominated Heinisch in round 1. If he would have showed up with cardio for 3 rounds, he would have won that fight 30-27 and Heinisch would have got dominated. How could you have known that Shoeface wouldn't show up with cardio for 3 rounds? He hadn't fought in like 2 years to a decision before that fight took place. Trizano against Dawson, there was no way to know whether Trizano would be able to take Trizano down, or Dawson would have been able to take Trizano down or not. Just these fights were not good for betting, and none of these fights are good for betting either. Now, the point I'm trying to make in all this is that by forcing bets and putting your money in marginal situations on cards like this really does induce the risk of running into long-term losing streaks or variance. Because it only takes 1 or 2 consecutive losses on a card to turn into 3 or 4 consecutive losses and months-long losses to really have you start doubting yourself and losing confidence. I mean, if we look at the calendar here, UFC on ESPN plus 10 took place on May the 18th, and UFC Stockholm scheduled to take place on June the 1st. So if we look at here on May the 18th, when the Lee versus RDA fight was scheduled to take place, I mean, it really doesn't matter if you made a profit or a loss on this card. Long term, if you keep putting your money in marginal situations, you'll probably get wrecked. So whether you made a profit or loss is kind of irrelevant. But just consider what would have happened if, you know, the week before on the Jessica Andrade versus Namajunas card, you would have taken a loss. Then you put your money in marginal situations on this Lee versus Dos Anjos card and you took another loss. And then now, say for example, you put your money in more marginal situations on the Stockholm card and take a loss. You're looking at 4 weeks of losing, an entire month of losing. Now imagine all the self-doubt, the lack of confidence, the frustration, the anger you may be feeling if you haven't learned to control your emotions yet over gambling. Imagine all the insecurity, the pressure you may feel to get back in the win column. after taking a month worth of losses. Imagine sitting in work every day or in the shower or driving around in the car going over these bets in your head and being mad at yourself and frustrated, and what that could do to affect your future performance. Just think about that. And all that could have been avoided just by passing on 2 shitty events. Yes, your friends might not respect you. They might call you a muppet. They might call you a jabroni. They might not take you seriously. They might not be intelligent enough to understand that in 24 consecutive fights that are taking place, it is not that crazy over the course of a year that you get a small isolated window where there are 24 fights which just aren't good for betting, because there are multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies out there whose job it is to set odds accurately on those 24 fights, and quite often they're going to get it right, or else they wouldn't be some of the biggest companies in the world. Like I say, I will keep going back to Mrs. Coates, but Denise Coates, CEO of Bet365, is the best paid woman in the world. She is the best paid woman in the world for a reason, because she relies on people like us making bad betting decisions and forcing bets where there are no good opportunities. Just always remember Denise Coates when you are thinking about forcing a bet and putting your money in a marginal situation. And I want to talk about this because I've already started researching UFC 238 and the UFC on ESPN card, Korean Zombie versus Renato Moicano, which is coming up later on in June. And I've already identified some very solid bets on these cards. I already have one very, very solid bet for UFC 238. And I've already identified a bet that I love on the Korean Zombie versus Moicano card. Now, I can't share with you now. I just have to get that out there. I'm not being a dick. There is method to the madness. The reason why I can't share them with you now is because liquidity is still relatively low on these events. And if you don't really know how liquidity in betting markets work, basically, the more money that gets bet on a fight, the less likely it is that a certain amount of money will move the odds. And obviously, the closer we get to the time that a fight takes place, the more money there is going to be bet on a fight. Therefore, the more liquidity there is. So, if I were to give you the bets that I've got for UFC 238 and the Korean Zombie versus Moicano fight now, when liquidity is going to be very low because we're still quite far away from the fights taking place, if just 10% of the people watching this video, because this video will probably get between 2,000 and 3,000 views, if just 10% of people were to go and place those bets, the odds would get destroyed because liquidity is currently very low and that doesn't help anyone. So to give you an example, if we wanted to bet on Paulo Costa against Joel Romero, which is scheduled to take place 3 months from now on August the 17th. Because this fight is so far away, not many bets would have been placed on this fight yet, which means if you were to go to one of these betting websites, and even if you were to just bet $250 to $500, that would be enough to move these odds. That would be enough to adjust these odds and make them decline, depending on which fighter you bet. Now, if you can imagine what would happen if, 200 or 300 people were to do that. If I was to say, go bet on Yoel Romero to beat Paulo Costa, which I'm not saying, it's just an example, but if I was to say, go bet on Yoel Romero, and 200-300 people that watch this video were to go and bet on Yoel Romero, by tomorrow, Romero's odds would probably be 1.20. They get absolutely decimated. So that's why I can't give bets out too far in advance. I can't place bets too far in advance because I have to wait for liquidity to build up. So I'm not being a dick by not sharing my bets with you. I'm just looking at the landscape coming up over the next few weeks to try and plan my betting decisions ahead of time. But this is significant because, say for example, you did force bets and place marginal bets on the Lee versus Dos Anjos card and also on this UFC Stockholm card, and you were to take losses. That then eats into your profit on the potentially solid bets coming up on UFC 238 and the Moicano Zombie card. Say, for example, you were to just lose maybe 3 or 4 units on these two cards. You've then got to make up 3 or 4 units of profit just to break even on the other betting opportunities coming up on June. Do you see where I'm going with this? It's very important to look at MMA betting or betting on any sport as an entire campaign that spans an entire year, because at the end of the year when you're looking back on your profit and loss, you won't give a shit about the events you passed on. All you'll care about is overall profit and loss. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, these individual events may seem like a big deal now in the moment, but in the bigger picture they are nothing. they are absolutely nothing. You know, if you've been following all my bets this year, all my pre-fight bets, you would have made around 30 units of profit so far in the last 5 months. That's a bloody good return. Would you have cared if throughout this year, dating back to January, I would have passed on 1 or 2 events? I mean, I'm sure I have, and I can't even remember if I have. Do you care now? Or do you just care about the money you've been able to make? You don't give a shit, right? You only care about the money. So why care about these marginal events now in the moment when in the bigger picture, they just don't matter? And also what we've got to remember is, I explained a few moments ago how you could quite easily hit a 4-week, 1-month long losing streak. Now, anything can happen in MMA. I've got a very solid bet for UFC 238, and I believe I'll have another very solid bet for this Moicano versus Korean Zombie card. But anything can happen in MMA. We're not betting on robots here. Fighters can underperform, they can get injured, fighters can improve immeasurably and look better than we expected them to, and we can lose. Anything can happen, right? So what were then to happen if you were to take a loss on one of these events, or both these events? You now can quite easily go from being on a 1-month losing streak to a 2-month losing streak. And imagine what that's going to be doing to your confidence, your self-talk, your state of mind, your frustration, your anger, where you're on a 2-month losing streak, you haven't won anything. Imagine how that might affect your judgment, and then it can snowball and spiral out of control. You know, it took me a long time to control my emotions, a long time to become disciplined, a long time to control tilt. And if you're watching this video, chances are a high percentage of people watching this video haven't learned to control their emotions around gambling and losses yet. So you should give yourselves the best chance of consistently winning by not putting your money in not putting your money in weak positions, only looking for the strong positions to put your money. Do you see what I'm saying, guys? I hope that makes sense. That's a very important point for me. Do not force bets. You may think I'm a fraud, you may think I'm clueless, you may think I'm a bum, you may think I'm a liar, but I promise you, all the information I give you has come through blood, sweat and tears. Mistakes I have learned over a very long period of time. I've been gambling for about 14 years now. I've been betting on MMA professionally for about 4 years now. It is a fucking mindfuck. It's a big deal. You have to learn from your mistakes, and everything I share with you is learning from my mistakes. I happily pass and sleep like a baby, because I don't care what other people think of me. I don't care about being the smartest guy in the bar. All I care about is making money, and passing on events like this and passing on these fights is the smartest thing you can do and the best way that you can conduct yourself to make money. And I hope you found that useful. I mean, there are other people that will not subscribe to this way of thinking at all. There are other people that are purely plus EV, mathematically driven people that will not agree with what I say. They will not sign up to my way of thinking. They will see these fights and they will think, if I've got a 5% edge over the bookie on Ozdemir, if I've got a 6% edge over the bookie on Anthony Smith, if I've got a 6% margin over the bookie on Damir Hadzovic, they will play the math and play the math and play the math, and they will believe that over the long term, they will make a profit. I could tell you with experience, I've been doing this for a long time and experimenting with lots of different styles and systems and ways of doing things, that they will probably just float around break even forever and they will not crush it. There are very few people out there on YouTube or online that use this method to make big money. There are very few people out there that can actually prove that they live a good life from this style of betting. This style of betting works great for games of chance. It works great in poker. Look, works absolutely brilliantly because we're dealing with absolutes. But when we're dealing with two guys fighting to the death in a cage until a referee steps in and stops them, that type of methodology does not work, because in order for plus EV mathematics to work, you have to have repeatable outcomes. It's a very basic principle you learn in school when you're dealing with probabilities. You have to have repetition in order for plus EV situations to guarantee a profit over time. That does not apply to any form of sports betting, because Alexander Gustafsson and Anthony Smith will never fight under the same circumstances, at the same age, at the same point in their life, in the same climate, same weather system, same country, same arena. This will never be repeatable, ever, ever, ever. So it doesn't matter what your plus EV is on either side. If your plus EV bet loses, it is dead in the water and you will never get it back. You could place 100 plus EV bets on MMA and 100 of them could lose because there are no repeatable outcomes. Whereas it is exceptionally unlikely that would happen, it is possible because there's nothing repeatable. So I understand people out there subscribe to that mindset and that is their style and that is their methodology, and I've got absolutely no problem with it. I would just say do you. I don't want to criticize that. I don't want to say it's shit. All I will say is out of experience it doesn't work, and that is why I much prefer to treat making money in this game as a campaign where I plot out my strategy throughout the year and I consistently only put my money in strong positions, because by doing that, by only putting my money in strong positions, I give myself the best chance of consistently making money throughout the year, and really that's all I care about, and really that's all you should care about. So that's just my 2 cents on the topic, and we will get into this in way, way, way deeper videos in the future. I will do videos dedicated to these topics where we can really have some deep discussions. But this is just, I think, a good time to talk about this sort of stuff, just because it's quite rare you have 2 UFC events in a short space of time that are this bad for betting. So while we've got 2 events that are really bad for betting, why not just use this as an opportunity to talk about some of this stuff? And also, if you're interested in this stuff, I gave out a little bit of homework in part 1 of this series of videos where I said, it'd be a good idea to go back and watch the fight between Sergio Moraes and Bolly Alves to kind of see how improvements the fighters can make in a short space of time can have a radical impact on how a fight could play out. Well, a lot of people liked that homework. I got a lot of comments over it, DMs, emails. So there's another little piece of homework now I'm going to give you if you're interested. If you're interested in learning more about how long losing streaks can happen to anyone and how you can make decisions to avoid that, then I really, really recommend checking out this podcast between Tim Ferriss and Phil Hellmuth. Now, I know I talk a lot about poker in my videos. I use it as a reference point because I'm from a poker background. And Phil Hellmuth is someone that I believe has won more money from tournament poker than anyone else. He's also won more World Series of Poker bracelets than anyone else, or World Series of Poker championships than anyone else. So when he talks, if you are interested in making a living from gambling, you should fucking listen to what he's got to say. And in this podcast with Tim Ferriss, Phil Hellmuth opens up and talks about a stage in his career where he actually went on a 2-year losing streak. So, if I've been on long losing streaks myself, and then people call you a fraud, they call you clueless, they say you don't know what you're doing, you're a muppet. People just lose all respect for you when you're on a losing streak. But the fact is, losing happens to everyone. Phil Hellmuth, one of the greatest poker players of all time, went on a 2-year losing streak. And in this podcast, he talks how he dug himself out of that hole, and also what he might have done differently to avoid that losing streak. So I will leave a link to this in the description below. I've listened to this podcast about 2 or 3 times. I absolutely love it. So yeah, check it out. If you're interested in making money from gambling, you should definitely learn from guys like Phil Hellmuth. And the fact that a guy like that is such an incredible gambler is able to go on a 2-year losing streak should make you understand that no matter how much you think you know about MMA, no matter how smart you think you are, variance can punch anyone in the dick. Bad losing streaks can catch up with anyone, and no one's immune to it. That's just the way it is. But that's all I want to say on the topic for now. Let's jump into the first fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is going to be Chris Fishgold against Makwan Amirkhani. Very, very nice. That's probably one of the best profile pics for Tapology I've ever seen. Shout out to Makwan. So Makwan Amirkhani was the first name that jumped out at me when I began researching this card, because he is a strong wrestler, and I know that Chris Fishgold isn't the best wrestler, not the most technical, and he has had cardio issues in the past. So Makwan Amirkhani was the first name that jumped out at me when I began researching this card. But unfortunately, as I began to research the fight, I liked it less and liked the bet on Amirkhani less and less. Now, this is a very interesting fight, a very unique fight, because both guys have got a very unique weakness that you very rarely see in MMA. A very unique strength and also a very unique weakness. And that weakness is that both these guys, both Fishgold and Amirkhani, they're both very strong offensive wrestlers, but their defensive wrestling, their takedown defense, is absolutely garbage. It's quite unique. You don't often see this because usually if someone is a very good offensive wrestler, they tend to be a good all-round wrestler, a good grappler. But for whatever reason, these guys have excellent offensive wrestling. They're great at taking other guys down, but they're very easy to take down themselves, which is very, very strange. You very rarely see this in MMA. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen two guys like this fight each other. It's kind of unique. And because of that, you kind of find yourself in a Wild West situation with these two guys where it's going to be fastest finger first. Whoever pulls the trigger first is going to put themselves in a strong position of winning because neither guy is particularly good off their back either. So whoever shoots the first takedown in the fight and gets it will probably win the round or 2 out of 3 rounds. And it's very, very difficult to predict who that is going to be. My hunch is that it's going to be Fishgold because he just comes out the gate so aggressive, doesn't waste any time in going after his opponent. But his takedown defense is so bad that it's possible Amirkhani could use that aggression against him and turn it into his own takedown. So it's a very, very risky fight for betting this, a very complicated fight. So when I started researching this fight, I thought Amirkhani was a better grappler than he is, but his takedown defense concerns me a lot. He also makes a lot of mistakes on the ground. And if this fight stays standing, one thing that does concern me is that because Amirkhani is primarily a grappler, he does tend to get caught cold quite a lot. And he gets rocked or dropped quite frequently. And if you go back and watch any of Chris Fishgold's fights, you'll see that he comes out the gate very aggressive, hits very hard, gets in his opponent's face. And I do think there's a significant chance Fishgold could knock Amirkhani out very early in the fight while he's still settling into a rhythm. Now, one weakness that has been present in Fishgold's UFC debut against Calvin Kattar was that he did gas bad in that fight. But I am finding it difficult to determine whether he does have bad cardio or whether this was just a blip, because this was his UFC debut, did come out very aggressive, and he kind of adrenaline dumped here. But even though his cardio's not looked amazing in his fights in Cage Warriors, it's difficult to gauge because so many of his past fights ended so quickly. So where he gassed out against Kattar may have just been a lack of experience, where he didn't really know how to pace himself, and that's why he slowed down, because he'd been so used to running through his opponents in Cage Warriors. And then against Daniel Teymur, he did show signs in that fight that he was starting to turn things around and improve his pacing and cardio, because even though there were moments in the fight where he looked like he was going to slow down against Teymur, he did catch a second wind in round 2 and get a finish. So I can't put my flag in the ground and say Fishgold's cardio is bad. I could just say there is a question mark there, but he might have tightened it up for this fight against Amirkhani. There are signs that he's got bad cardio. There are signs that he may not have bad cardio. It might just be a pacing issue, fight IQ issue. But we're going to learn a lot more about his cardio against Amirkhani in this fight at UFC Stockholm. So this is a very, very complex fight. It's an easy fight for me to pass on, which is probably no surprise to you after the speech I gave about passing on fights. If we look at the odds, Fishgold is currently a slight favourite at around about, call it average odds of 1.80, which is minus 125 for an implied probability of 56%. If I had to cap this fight, I would actually have Amirkhani as a slight favourite, just because I feel he is the more technical grappler. His cardio isn't in question, Fishgold's is, and for those two reasons, he probably deserves to be the favourite over Fishgold. But the odds on Amirkhani at the moment, I believe they're about an average of 2.10. Actually, no, call it 2.05, which is plus 105 for an implied probability of 49%. So the bookies are currently seeing this at about a 50-50 fight, and I tend to agree with them. I slightly lean towards Amirkhani, but Can't really argue with these odds. Don't really see a betting opportunity here. It's an easy pass for me, guys. So now let's move on to the next fight, which I'm going to talk about in today's video, which is going to be Leonardo Santos against Stevie Ray. So this is another interesting fight because based on past performances, this is a very, very easy fight for Leonardo Santos. And I say this because on the most simplistic level, this is a striker versus grappler matchup with Santos being the grappler and Stevie Ray being the striker. The problem is Santos, even as a grappler, is possibly going to be able to win this fight standing against Stevie Ray. I mean, Ray certainly doesn't have that big of an advantage over Santos standing. He may even get outstruck by Santos. But all this, I have to put a caveat on this as saying, I am basing how I feel about this fight here on past performances. And in a moment, I will get into the reasons why past performances may not mean much in this fight. But if we look at past performances, I believe Leonardo Santos has the skills to outstrike Stevie Ray. You know, Stevie Ray's not a particularly dangerous striker, doesn't really have any power in his hands. He likes to stay on the outside and just counter-strike. Doesn't really put his stamp on rounds. Is very one-paced if he's falling behind. Doesn't really go up a gear. Just very, very average is what I would say about Stevie Ray. And obviously the thing that's cost him big time in the past is his takedown defense. Stevie Ray's takedown defense is very bad. His ground game is very bad. He's also at a size disadvantage in this fight. You see he's 5'10" with a 70-inch reach. Santos is 6'1" with a 75-inch reach. So that'll further help Santos do well if the fight stays standing. But the problem with Stevie Ray's always been his takedown defense and ground game, and that's an issue against Leonardo Santos, who is you know, a bajillion jiu-jitsu guy, but he's also one of those BJJ guys with decent offensive wrestling, you know, nothing to blow your hair back, but reasonably good. And he's obviously an extremely high-level black belt. Very, very high-level black belt. If this fight goes to the ground, Stevie Ray is in big trouble. But this fight gets a little bit complicated. Because if we look at the odds, Leonardo Santos is quite a big favourite at average odds, around about 1.45, which is minus 222 for an implied probability of 69%. Now, I will entertain betting, guys, at these odds in situations like this where they have pretty much every advantage you could want. I mean, Santos has got the size and reach advantage. I think he can actually outstrike Ray as well, and a massive advantage when it comes to grappling. You know, if we look at the odds on Stevie Ray, currently around about a 2.95 underdog, which is plus 195 for an implied probability of 34%. Just bear in mind those odds with what I'm about to say next. So, yes, Leonardo Santos has a lot of advantages here, but he's also 39 years old. He's getting old now. 39, you know, there are not many 39-year-old fighters competing in the UFC. There are not many 39-year-old fighters still hanging with the best in the world, especially in the lower weight classes like the lightweight division. Obviously, when you're older, you can get away with competing in the higher weight classes like heavyweight, where fighters tend to peak later on in their career, the heavier they go. But in the lighter weight classes, there aren't many guys close to the age of 40 that are still competing in the UFC, particularly not in the lightweight division, and certainly not doing that well. This is a young man's sport. And also, if we look back through Leonardo Santos' record, we can see that Santos hasn't fought in around about 2.5 years since he beat Adriano Martins by split decision. So this is why this fight is complicated, because Santos deserves to be a big favourite based on what we've seen from him in all these fights. You know, based on the skills that he displayed in these fights, this is an easy stylistic matchup for him. Should be able to win the fight standing up or on the ground against Ray. But it gets complicated because he's old as fuck in a division that favours young fighters, and he hasn't fought in 2.5 years. So he's battling with a lot of ring rest, and who knows what's kept him out of the cage for this long. Is he still motivated to fight? You know, there's obviously some issues here for him to be out for the last 2.5 years. And also, what I would say is that Leonardo Santos is one of the more notable fighters that has fought out of Nova União throughout his entire career. You know, if we look on his Instagram profile, you can see lots of training pictures from him at Nova União. Here's a picture of him you know, with Jose Aldo, long-time training partner of Jose Aldo, and there's plenty of pictures here of him training at Nova União. So there he is with Andre Pederneiras, the head coach of Nova União. So Leonardo Santos has trained at Nova União throughout his entire career, and that's quite significant here because we haven't really seen that much of Leonardo Santos in the last 2.5 years. In fact, we haven't seen much of Leonardo Santos in the last 3.5 years, dating back to this fight against Kevin Lee from December 2015. You know, if you look at it, really in the last 3.5 years, Leonardo Santos has only spent 15 minutes in the cage in that time, which isn't a lot of time. And in the last 3.5 years, guys that trained at the Nova União gym aren't exactly doing great. They're not exactly looking great. I mean, if we go through it, Reynan Barão, his career has fallen off a cliff within this time period, you know, since USADA came into effect. Claudia Gadelha, her career has fallen off a cliff within this time period since USADA came into effect. Hakrin Diaz, his career's fallen off a cliff. Johnny Eduardo has retired, his career's fallen off a cliff. Junior Dos Santos, not exactly doing great in this time period compared to how he looked earlier in his career. You know, Jose Aldo, not exactly doing great. Had some moments against Renato Moicano, but generally speaking, that performance against Alexander Volkanovski was very bad. Aldo, you know, the famous son of Nova União, not exactly doing great. So all these high-profile fighters that train out of Nova União, in this time period where Leonardo Santos has been competing, they haven't exactly been doing great or looking great. They've definitely declined in this period since USADA came into effect. So what does that mean for Leonardo Santos? Will he be the outlier? Will he come back at 39 years old and look exactly like he did when he fought these guys, Adriano Martins and Kevin Lee and Tony Martin and Efrain Escudero? Or will he have declined significantly like all the other fighters that we've seen over the last 4 years who have come out of the Nova União camp? And there are probably some other examples that I can't think of. You know, I know Aldo, I know Dos Anjos, I know Gadelha have had their moments within this period of time, but generally speaking, they're not doing as well in this period of time as they were before USADA came into effect. Definitely on a decline. So that is something to think about. So the point I'm trying to make is, based on past performances, Santos should win this fight easily. I would not bet Ray, because Santos has the skills to dominate the fight wherever it takes place. But based on the fact that he's old, based on the fact he trains out of Nova União, and based on the fact that he's been so inactive, I can't bet him. It's an easy pass for me. Hope that makes sense, brothers and sisters. I actually looked at my analytics this week, and 1.6% of my viewers are female, so shout out to you if you're female watching this channel. I know my mum watches my videos, so shout out to you, mum, if I haven't bored you already and you skipped this. But now we will go into talking about the final fight that I want to go through in today's video, which is going to be Frank Camacho against Nick Hein. And there is a lot to unpack in this fight. Again, I am sorry, this video is long. All the videos this week have been long, and the reason why they've been long is because often the worst fights for betting require the deepest discussion and the longest analysis, because there is so many things to consider, which ultimately makes them bad fights for betting, right? If they were good fights for betting, they would be more straightforward and easy to break down and easy to explain. But because they are bad for betting, there's a lot to go through. And the same applies to this fight between Frank Camacho and Nick Hein. And this is a complicated fight, similar to the last one, because Frank Camacho is amazing. I love Frank Camacho, and he has the skills to beat Nick Hein everywhere. No doubt about it. But just like with a Leonardo Santos versus Stevie Ray fight, there are some factors which complicate things, and I will get into that in this breakdown. So stylistically, this is an easy fight for Frank Camacho. There's no doubt about it. If it stays standing, Camacho can dominate. If it goes to the ground, Camacho can dominate. Camacho has a huge advantage when it comes to striking. Not only does he have a huge size and reach advantage, here we can see him stand at 5'10" with a 73-inch reach, compared to Nick Hein with a 66.5-inch reach, standing at 5'8". So Nick Hein will be giving up a decent size advantage here at only being 5'8", but a massive reach advantage. We're looking at about a 6-inch reach advantage for Frank Camacho, which is absolutely huge. And Frank Camacho is a very technical striker, an excellent kickboxer, heavy hands, very technical, great chin, great striking defense. Or actually, he's got great striking defense when he's got gas in the tank. More on that later. But one of the reasons why Frank Camacho's got such a good chin is because he's so comfortable being tired. He's so comfortable in the exchanges that he just sees everything coming. So when his opponents are landing shots on him, he's rolling with the punches, and these subtle movements take the sting off him. So while I could understand someone saying, he does have bad striking defense because he gets hit a lot, I completely agree with you. But one of the reasons why we don't see him get hurt that badly in his fights is because he's so fluid and he rolls with the shots so well. So he's got the size advantage, he's got the striking advantage. Nick Hein, not particularly dangerous striking. He's got pillow fists, doesn't really hit that hard. He's also got T-Rex arms, very, very short arms for the division. Just not that dangerous striking. Shouldn't really do that much. Shouldn't really cause Camacho that much problems standing. And on the ground, Camacho is also a very strong wrestler, good MMA grappler, certainly a much better MMA grappler than Nick Hein. I mean, Nick Hein's got a judo background, but he very rarely uses his judo, and Camacho is so difficult to take down and hold down that I really don't think grappling will come into this fight anyway. If this fight does go to the ground, it'll probably be because Camacho's got the takedown. And also, Nick Hein at 35 years old is now going to be at the stage in his career where he'll be declining from fight to fight, whereas Camacho still at 30 years old, he's going to be improving. So after everything I've just said, Frank Camacho's got an advantage everywhere. He's younger, he's got a size advantage, better striker, better grappler. Naturally, at decent odds, Camacho would be a good bet, right? You expect me to say Camacho's a good bet. Currently the odds are around even money on both guys. And unfortunately, I wish I could tell you I thought Camacho was a good bet, but I can't. Because they're just nothing is where we needed to be on this card, unfortunately. There were just no betting opportunities, which is frustrating. And the reason why we can't bet on Camacho here, despite the fact that he's got an advantage everywhere, is because he's just got really bad cardio. Just really, really bad cardio. It's not unusual for him to be completely gassed out of his mind after 3 or 4 minutes. But again, guys, it gets complicated. It does. I'm just sat here now sick of saying the word complicated, but it is. It's a complicated fight. It's a complicated sport. This is why it's not easy to make money on this sport. So Camacho has got bad cardio. A lot of the time he tends to gas out within 5 minutes. But because he gasses out so frequently, he's actually surprisingly effective when he does get tired. Even when he does gas out, he's still able to be competitive somehow, even though he looks terrible, even though he's got his arms down by his side and he's taking deep breaths. Because he's so comfortable being tired, because he gets tired so often, he's still competitive and dangerous. But if he gets tired in this fight, Hein should be able to outwork him and take a decision if we see Camacho gas out after 3 or 4 minutes again. Now, this fight is so complicated, I'm sick of saying it. The reason why this fight is complicated is because Camacho did have one fight where his cardio looked decent. I'm not going to say it looked good, he definitely slowed down, but he had one fight in his career, or one fight in his UFC career, where his cardio would be good enough to beat Nick Hein. What I'm trying to say is, if Camacho showed up with the level of cardio I saw in his fight against Damian Brown, he would beat Nick Hein, in my opinion. And there's something very significant going on there, because Frank Camacho gassed out against Jing Liang, but that fight was at welterweight. He gassed out against Drew Dober, that fight was at welterweight. He gassed out against Jeff Neal, that fight was at welterweight. His cardio didn't look amazing against Damian Brown, but it held up. That fight was at lightweight. So the only time in Camacho's UFC career where his cardio was kind of semi-held up was when he fought at lightweight. All his other fights in the UFC have been at welterweight. And that's significant because this fight is at lightweight. Which is very interesting because Camacho looked really okay in this fight. He looked okay. I'm not going to say he looked amazing. He looked okay. But if he shows up and performs like he did against Damian Brown, I think he'll beat Nick Hein. So that's interesting, right? And what I would also say is that you could physically see this. This is one of those breakdowns where I wish I could use UFC Fight Pass to show you footage of their past fights so that you can make much more sense of the information I'm giving you. But if you look at how Camacho looked when he fought Jing Liang or Dober or Jeff Neal, you'll see that in the cage, Camacho looked really soft. He's definitely got a better body than me. I am rocking the dad bod at 35 years old. But he definitely looked soft, right? Whereas against Damian Brown, when he fought at lightweight, he was ripped. He was absolutely ripped. Now, another thing we have to bear in mind is that he did miss weight for this fight. He weighed in at 160 pounds. So did that help his cardio in this fight? You know, if he actually does kill himself to make weight against Nick Hein, will his cardio look just as shit as it did in the welterweight fights? But it's something to think about because his body type definitely looked different. Against Jing Liang, Dober and Neal, he looked soft. Against Damian Brown, he looked ripped. And if we go to Frank Camacho's Instagram page, what's interesting is that there are lots of recent training pictures of him looking shredded, looking ripped, looking in good shape. Yeah? These are all recent pictures. This picture is 5 days ago. So in these pictures, he looks like he did against Damian Brown. I mean, I don't know if he's going to be able to make weight. He missed weight quite substantially here at 160 pounds. How will his cardio look if he kills himself to cut the additional 5 pounds to make weight against Hein? Will he even make weight? You know, if he plays dirty and misses weight, that gives him an advantage, right? That's probably a good thing. If you're betting Camacho, that's what you'll want. You want him to miss weight. But these are all things to weigh up. So Camacho's cardio, if Camacho showed up with cardio like he did against Neal, Dober or Jing Liang, I think he loses. If he shows up with cardio like he did against Brown, I think he wins. But it gets complicated again, which is the reason why I hope you appreciate why these last two events have been so hard for betting. It gets complicated again, guys, because Frank Camacho is taking this fight on about 3 weeks' notice. Nick Hein was originally scheduled to face Luigi Vendramini, and Vendramini pulled out about 3 weeks ago. So now we've got a major dilemma, right? We have got a guy in Frank Camacho that has pretty much every advantage in the book. You know, bigger, Father Time is on his side, advantage striking, advantage grappling. Pretty much every advantage in the book. We know his cardio has looked terrible in some of his past fights. But we know there are clues that it may not be terrible because when he's fought in this weight class before, it's been okay. But then at the same time, we know he's taken the fight on short notice. He hasn't had a full training camp for this fight. So is it smart to bet on a fighter who has bad cardio, who's taken a fight on 3 weeks' notice? I mean, it's probably not smart, guys. The safest thing to do here is probably to pass. So depending on your risk tolerance, really depends on if you're going to bet on this fight or not. Personally, I'm going to pass because I think it's way too much of a risk to bet on a guy that we know has bad cardio, taking a fight on 3 weeks' notice. I just think it's a big risk, okay? But I don't think a bet on Camacho is terrible because reading between the lines, there is a suggestion his cardio might look better at lightweight. And in his training pics, he looks in very good shape. You know, if he's one of these guys who's always in the gym, if he was waiting on a UFC fight, you know, I don't know. Make your own mind up. I'm going to pass because I like money and I see much better betting opportunities coming up over the next few weeks on the Korean Zombie versus Moicano card and also UFC 238. I'll start to be putting out videos for UFC 238 very soon. I'm going to pass just because I see better opportunities coming up. But out of everyone on the card, there are bets that I have reluctantly passed on. I've reluctantly passed on Ozdemir, reluctantly passed on Amirkhani, and reluctantly passed on Camacho. If you really want to place bets on this card to get that dopamine hit, to get the adrenaline rush, if you just bet for fun, those 3 fighters are probably the best bets, but they're fucking risky, and I'm not betting them myself. So with that, guys, that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry it was long, but I just gotta get shit off my chest every once in a while. And like I say, the fights on this card are complex. If you want me to do a live stream for UFC Stockholm and listen to me talk even more, please hit the like button below. For every video that I put out this week, part 1, 2, 3 and 4, if they all get 300 likes, I will do that live stream where I'll find a decent value prop bet for every single fight taking place on UFC Stockholm. We've been doing well on the prop bets lately, so maybe you'll be able to earn some money if you hit that like button and we do the live stream. And also, I will take the time to answer every single one of your questions from the live chat in that video, and I will do the live stream probably 2 or 3 hours before UFC Stockholm is scheduled to start. So thank you for watching, guys. Take care. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I would love to hit 1,500 subscribers by the time UFC Stockholm starts. But again, thanks for watching. Take care. I'll be back very soon with part 4.
Too many thoughts on my mind, I can't sleep at night, so I just keep writing. I don't need no help, I don't need opinions, so don't waste my time then. I just been living online, my city don't show me no love and that's fine. Fuck local radio stations, I got more plays than all of these rappers combined. I'm going again, I've been going in, I'm fed up with so many things. I gotta just let it all out, I'm talking about the shit they've been talking about.